Hello, beautiful, and welcome to the Moms Talks Sex podcast. I'm your host, Maury Yelvington of Morph Transform Your Reality, where I help women step out of trauma and reclaim their power. I'm so happy to have you here for this open conversation about moms, sex, motherhood, children, relationships, marriage, and everything in between. So grab your drink of choice and let's dive in. So honored to have the beautiful Michelle here with me today. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And I'm actually really excited for our conversation today. I think it's going to really benefit a lot of our listeners that maybe have experienced some of the stuff that you've experienced and you went through in your life, and just bring some awareness and light to what they're dealing with and how they can choose to do things a little differently. So Michelle, how about you start with introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your story?
Well, thank you. I am a life coach, and I primarily work with women that are in the LDS or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints religion. I work with them around marriages, around their bodies, and there's unique qualities that go with being in a high demand religion, but I think it's similar to a lot of other things that were going on. We're all kind of in this patriarchal culture, and often, if you're religious at all, you're in most religions are patriarchal, and so we kind of deal with the same issues. And my story is I was divorced 5 years ago, and since that time I have been on a mission to solve the problems that basically broke up my marriage. And so I've been always interested in relationships, always interested in marriage and sexuality. And I think that, there's so much to dig into when we're talking with women about this, because we've got this culture of hierarchy, in and around like everyone experiences it, but particularly women who are from religious backgrounds. And that shows up in everywhere in a marriage. And one of the ways that it showed up in my own marriage and, was a contributing factor to the breakup was that my husband, we both entered into this sort of like what I would call a secret contract. Neither of us stated it, but the contract was that he was the head of the household. He was on top. And as the mother, as a woman, I would have said that I was secondary. But then when the kids came along, then the kids, were secondary in that hierarchy. And then all of the other, people in our lives that I was serving, and then myself. So, when that occurs, it's sort of a recipe for resentment. And when a marriage isn't set up as a marriage of equals, you get these subtle threads of things coming into it that create cracks in marriages. And it shows up in the bedroom. It shows up in, parenting. We often, argued about the way to parent kids, the way to, how to solve money issues, so that one of the things that we both recognize, we've come full circle in our relationship. And even though we're divorced, we're good friends, and we've recognized that we both contributed to this dynamic. It wasn't just him deciding that he was the head of the household. I agreed with it, so when we can talk about patriarchy all we want, but often the women are the ones bringing it. The men happily agree to that. Sure, I'll be in charge here. But we're the ones saying, well, this is how it should be, because that's how our mothers did it, right? We look to our parents' marriages. That's how our mothers did it. That's how their mothers did it, our great grandmothers. So we come by it honestly, but not recognizing it and, changing that dynamic in modern marriage largely contributes to, the breakup of a marriage. And so, some of the things that helped me recognize, I went and got some coaching after a time. I know that, healing from, divorce or anything like that can take some time. It's a grieving process like a lot of others. And after I got some coaching, I realized, I had been presenting myself as, well, I'm practically perfect in every way. I was the Mary Poppins in my marriage, I'd kept myself in shape. I cooked all the meals. I kept the house clean. I kept I tried to do everything perfectly. And so I felt very justified in my frustration and anger over why would someone, want a divorce from me. And my coach was able to help me see that, she said one sentence that shifted everything for me. And she said, well, Michelle, husbands don't leave perfect wives. And, my marriage had broken up as a result of an affair that he had, an emotional affair. And I really had to sit and think about that. Like, what was I bringing? Where was I blind to my imperfection? And what I discovered, it was interesting. The minute she asked me that question, I had a scene of my life, and it was kind of it was a common scene. It happened all the time. And I flashed to a moment in my life when my husband would come home from work and pull into the driveway, and he would come in and he would start yelling about, the kids' toys in the driveway, or, he was frustrated that, that the house wasn't perfectly picked up, or there was, some reason for him to be upset. And I remember this particular time, the kids were upstairs. We had a bonus room above the kitchen, and they were jumping off the beds, and there was a lot of noise going on. And he came in and was like, what's the noise? And I rushed upstairs and shush the kids, and said, Dad's home. And everybody knew what that meant, shape up and be quiet. And so I remember walking down the stairs. This was the scene that I saw. I passed him, he's coming up the stairs, and I'm going down. And I just remember that flash of I was just enraged. I was so frustrated that this was a life we were living. Like, nobody could make a sound, nobody could make a mess, nobody, and he was not happy with me, and I was not happy with him. And in that moment, I knew that was it. That was the problem, was this resentment that I was holding because I didn't think that I could speak the truth. And I didn't think that I could say the things that had needed to be said. And what I didn't understand is I was missing a bunch of skills. And one of those skills is the ability to speak honestly to my husband. And so even though we had what I would have characterized a pretty good sexual dynamic in our marriage, now in retrospect, I can see where it wasn't truly intimate, because true intimacy between a partners, it's not just about the physical act of sex. It's not just about, the kissing and the cuddling and the, penetration. It's really truly about knowing the other person and being open to that, being vulnerable and open and honest. And so the sexual component, how it affected us in the bedroom, was if I didn't feel like I could speak honestly about my resentments, about all of the other stuff going on in our marriage, I certainly couldn't open myself up completely to him sexually, right? To be completely seen and known. And so it was satisfying on a certain level, but I didn't know that we were bumping against a ceiling that was limited by my resentment and his, I'm just going to call it out like it is, bad behavior.
Yeah.
And so one of the skills that I have learned since then is basically, well, two things I will say. Having a standard. I didn't know that I could have standards. People like to call it boundaries. And I just like that word because it feels aggressive and it feels protective, like sort of like, I'm going to put this fence between you and me. Right. Mm-hmm. So I don't love using the term boundary for that reason. I like to use the word standard. Like, I didn't have a standard in my marriage that we just don't do this, right? We don't do things like, the standard isn't that you can come home and just start yelling at everyone willy-nilly for just living, right? Kids make noise. Sometimes they jump off of beds, and so yeah, I didn't feel like I had, I just didn't know, oh, you can have a standard, you can, and here's the other interesting thing about that is another skill is that I learned later was you can invite your husband into that kind of a marriage where there are high standards, and husbands want to rise. Humans want to rise. We're growth creatures. We want to live at a higher standard. We always want to be getting better. And I was operating under the assumption that my husband wanted to be the bad guy. He wanted to come and yell at us. He wanted to be this guy who, like, everyone's scattered when he came home from work. And that's just not true. Husbands actually want to be the guys that their wife runs to the door and wraps their arms around them, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They want to be the guy that their wives are like excited to, see come home, and everyone doesn't just scatter like cockroaches, when they walk in the door. So, I didn't understand that, number one, I could have a standard, and number two, that I could invite my husband into that kind of a marriage, right? Where the standards were high and it was delightful for everyone. And so we operated in this low level place because we both just thought, well, this is how it is. This is what I want, without recognizing that it wasn't really what we wanted. Was the same things. I thought we wanted opposite things. He thought we wanted opposite things. So instead of being, partners, we were combatants, And so, like I said, some of the, some of the practical things that I would say is decide in your mind, like, what kind of marriage do I want? As moms, we sometimes don't even think about what we want for breakfast, right? We can't even decide, what do we want to wear today? I don't know. Yesterday's clothes that have spit up on them because they're easy, or they're already on our bodies, right?
Right.
So yeah, taking some time to imagine. There are marriages, and that's the other thing. My parents had a great marriage. They've been married for over 50 years, and they are happy with each other. But they did operate in that same dynamic of, what my dad said went, and my mom followed. And I can see that it's, over the 50 years, they've learned to, just learn so many things, right? But I can see where some of those things that have been really hard earned, that have taken them 50 years to get. And my dad is, just a wonderful, cares deeply about my mom and takes care of all kinds of household things. But you don't have to suffer, you said, toward loosely, for 50 years to figure these things out. Right. If you develop the skills early on. And one of those skills, like I said, is just take time to think about what kind of marriage you want, what kind of sexual relationship you want. Do you, the reason affairs occurred, this is the other thing, I had no experience with affair partners until my husband had one. And I thought that it was always about the other woman, right? That was such a desirable thing. And it wasn't until it happened to me and I started doing a deep dive into what in the world just happened to me, this just rocked our entire family, it was torn apart. But it's often, I listen to Esther Perel, beautiful, Belgium sex therapist, and she has some really good thoughts about affairs. And one of them is, often the partner having the affair isn't necessarily seeking another person as much as they're seeking a new self. And, so I made it about me. And like I said, I went into the Mary Poppins defense posture, I was practically perfect. Why would you ever leave me? Instead of understanding that, that had I taken the time to say, oh, this is the kind of marriage, this is the kind of guy you want to be, this is the kind of woman I want to be, it would have solved so much. So I don't care what age you are, young mom, middle-aged mom, if you're in a marriage that isn't to your liking, take a breather, take some time and decide, what are the standards? There are beautiful marriages, not everyone's marriage is broken.
Right. And I don't think it's broken, like you said. I just think a lot of times we just lack the communication and the time. It's like we kind of get into this whirlwind of
motherhood and children, and you kind of feel like you're drowning, that's the last thing on your plate. But really, if you can take a step back and really find time to communicate with each other and bring these things to the table, and knowing that you actually have somebody that's interested to listen. Because I bet when you're coming from a restricted religion and, you know, there is this like patriarchy and you believe that that's the truth, it's very hard to step out and know that you even have a different choice. And so I love what you're bringing to the table, because I do believe that maybe you didn't even realize back then that you could even have that voice, that you have the room to say that stuff, that you even knew where to come from. And maybe that he would he even be able to listen if he sees himself as, you know, the man, the ruler, right? Like, so there's a lot of that comes to play. And it's really interesting because it just shows how much of our past and our belief systems that we bring in just create the same patterns, where you were able to step out of it, you know, and rethink it and recreate it, and able to come up with these tools and advice for women that are still in a marriage to really start looking at these things now to prevent, you know, the separation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I look at my life, you know, the end of my marriage as a cautionary tale, you know. So I mean, I had a beautiful life. I'm not going to say that the whole marriage wasn't terrible. It was lovely in so many ways. And yet there was just enough cracks in there because of this lack of skill and things that we both were bringing, you know, because of, you know, this religious, you know, idea. And he actually had grown up Catholic. So it wasn't even like, you know, we eventually were part of the same church, but both very patriarchal religions, right? So, yeah. So, you know, the skill of being able to set a standard, and another skill of being able to invite your husband to raise to the standard, right? That you've decided. And then, you know, the other component with that is, you know, your conviction to get that kind of a marriage. Like when I'm, you know, coaching women who are struggling in these kinds of marriages, often, you know, that there's this fear and just like, I just can't get divorced. Like it would be the worst thing in the world. And my motto is, you know, get a better marriage without having to get a new husband, right? I'm all for marriage. I'm pro marriage. Keep it together. You know, that's my mission, because I know, you know, I know that I know what it's like to lose that. And so, but there is this point where you have to decide, you know, how much do I want this? You know, you can set a standard, right? You can communicate that standard with a lovely invitation that, you know, if done the right way, that no man would ever, I mean, what guy is going to say, oh no, I don't think I want a marriage in which my husband or my wife runs to meet me at the door and ravishes me, you know, in the bedroom at night. You know, of course we all want that kind of a marriage. And of course, every guy wants that kind of a marriage too. But the third thing is the ability to actually communicate that standard with an invitation, not a demand, not a, you know, that's why I hate the boundary talk, because it puts husbands on the defense. It puts wives on the defense, you know. But an invitation to be in this better marriage is far more likely to be accepted. And then to have the conviction to hold the standard. Right?
Well, you know how they say, like, happy wife, happy life, right? And I think when you're talking about the standard for the marriage, I think a lot of it is also the standard for yourself. And so many of us just give up ourselves and who we are in order to fit in order to fill in these roles, and we just forget that. And so in the end of the day, when none of you is left, when your cup is empty and there's nobody there to talk to, you're also not the person that your husband married anymore. Right. So yeah, they might go look for somebody else. And that's why I keep saying, like, your soul care, your self-care is the number one priority. And you should be the matriarch of the relationship, but the matriarch for you. You know, that's why I have my matriarch program, because you are the matriarch for your life And when you can be the matriarch, he could be the patriarch, and together you can rule the kingdom.
Right.
Right. But it's not the servant
Right.
mentality.
Yeah. And, I mentioned that when we were talking earlier, is that no man actually wants to rule over his wife. No man wants to be married to a dependent. And when women slide into that, we're bringing the patriarchy when we're the ones saying, I'm number two here, right? You're number one, I'm number two. And no, on the outset, we may think that a guy wants to rule over his wife, but he actually doesn't. He's far more interested in an equal and sexually interested in an equal, which is why, when women underfunction, slide under a man, walk in his shadow, however you want to language it, it's not attractive, right? And we don't, and I'm not just talking about for him, it's not attractive to our own selves. Right. So when you're talking about, about not taking care of, not being the matriarch, not showing up as the equal in the role, we're the ones who are, undercutting our own power. And, it's when there's that one up, one down dynamic in a marriage, then there's nowhere, no place for a good sexual dynamic in that, because if he's the one above, he's not as attracted, to you. If you're the one below, you're looking up, resenting. And that comes in the bedroom. There's no way that cannot show up in the bedroom. So you're absolutely right. Stepping into your own equality, I mean, that's huge. It's everything, and it's respectable. It was interesting because one of the interesting things that happened after my divorce, I had been, because we were in that one up and one down dynamic, I had been asking permission from my husband to remodel our kitchen for years. I just was like, I called it the black hole. It was dark. It had orange granite. It was terrible. And the rest of our house was light. We'd updated and painted and everything. And but I hated my kitchen. And for years, I just begged him to do something about it. And he just didn't want to do it. He didn't want to leave with the dust. He didn't want to live with the dust. He didn't want to deal with, he just didn't want to remodel. And so, of course, what did I do the minute I divorced him? We divorced as I went and remodeled my kitchen, So I was like, no, I'm getting this thing that I've wanted so badly for so long. And I remember, we were repairing our friendship at that point. After a certain point, I'd kind of gotten over the trauma or drama, whatever it was, of being divorced and everything. And he came into my newly remodeled kitchen for the first time. And he walked in and he just looked around and his eyes were like saucers. And he's just like, wow. And he looked at me, he asked me some questions. I had contracted the whole thing. I didn't hire, I hired, but I had done it all. I had just acted as, and some of the work myself, but anyway, he saw what I had done. And he's just like, he said the funniest thing. He was like, I've never been more attracted to you than at this very moment, as he was looking at me. And of course, it was a little bit strange, but at the same time, I understood what he was saying. I had stepped into that role that you're describing. I had taken it, right? Now, unfortunately, I didn't do that inside the marriage, right? But when I left, and he even said later, he's like, I feel like I let you free, like you were a caged bird and I let you free. The tragedy of that is I was never a caged bird, right? I had caged myself and he had agreed to it and we lived in that dynamic, but it didn't have to be that way. And I could have made financial decisions. I could have made decisions that were different inside the marriage, but I didn't know that I had a right to. It's just that dynamic of, like we were talking about earlier, of just, this is the role you play. This is just how it is. And without questioning that, and never asking, can I drive a better marriage, right? Do I have the ability to step in as an equal here and make a decision? And anyway, so it is just interesting when a woman does that, and I know it can be done inside of marriage because I've coached women and they've claimed it, and the respect that a husband has for a wife who steps into that matriarchy, equality, it's just mind blowing. Yeah. And that's what the husbands want. You know,
Yeah.
the biggest mistake we think that we make often is that we think they want to hold all the power in the marriage, and they just don't.
And I think we just forget what we want. Like I call this your diamond status, right? When you claim your body, mind, soul, and your source, your powerhouse, your sexuality, who you are, you step into your diamond status. And then when you shine so bright, everybody, you know, everybody's attractive to you, and the things that you don't want are blinded away. And that's exactly what it is, right? Because when we're standing in our power, we're the most attractive, and we're the most attractive to us first and foremost. And it's when we stop cutting ourselves out and off that we can actually allow. Because if you can't feel comfortable in your own body and your skin, and you're not attractive to yourself, and you're resentful and angry, and you have all this anxiety about everything, the energy you put out into the world, that's the message that you're sending. Absolutely. And that anger just builds. You know, you always see those movies when you are so frustrated by the time your husband comes home, he just feels that, and everything also goes on him, right? So in your marriage, I think it was just like we all scatter. In other marriages, the wife kind of bites his head off, right? Because she is so angry and she's so frustrated, and the resentment's been building for so long, and she doesn't feel like she's getting compensated in any way, right? So there's just a lot of that disconnect. So I'm so happy that you bring this stuff to the table. I think it's so important to be able to step in, like I said, to your diamond status, to your, you know, essence, and really being able to speak your truth. But the most important thing, I think, is recognizing how much of yourself you've given up, even before you stepped into the marriage.
Right.
Even before you know, even before you decide to get married, maybe before you decide to have children, and all this stuff is coming up now because it's amplified by your husband and how he's treating you, by the children and how they're treating you, right? They're like your mirror, and they're acting upon what you're putting out there. And so the more of us that can really tune into who we are and claim that and reclaim that and understand what it is that we're putting out into the world and the messages that we're giving people, we are able to really bring back what we actually desire.
Yeah, we're so much more powerful than I think that we realize. So, you know, we have the opportunity right now to break that cycle for our own daughters. We've inherited this patriarchal frame, and we're recognizing, oh, it's actually not helpful for the women or the men. So as you're saying, you know, claiming that diamond status, like having a full integration of body, soul, mind, sexuality, and being in that powerful place, we get to pass that forward, right? And what we've received doesn't have to continue going. And so when you are able to do that, you know, and it was interesting that you brought up our bodies. One of the interesting things that I've been toying around with is, you know, I've primarily been working with women in marriage. And one of the things that I notice is the second thing that they want help with is their bodies. And so we figure some things out in their marriage, things are going better and everything. And then all of a sudden they're like, you know, and I want to lose some weight. I want to feel better in my body. And so I've actually been experimenting a little bit with some of these, with, you know, some women with, maybe we focus on the body first and see what happens. It's been fascinating to see when a woman is becoming really powerful in her body. And when we start with that, they learn these meta skills, right? And these meta skills apply to the marriage, they apply to their home, they apply to their career, you know, all these other things. And I'm finding it's really interesting because working in tandem and not just, well, let's just work on your marriage as a separate part, but integrating all of that work together. And sometimes just starting at the center of that, which is your body, yourself, right? We're not going to focus out here, and getting strong in that changes everything around you, changes the dynamic of everything. So I'm actually starting to speak a little bit differently, you know, to my own audience about let's fix, you know, I say fix, but let's find your power and integrate this inner and outer, you know, inside of you and your outside body, and start with that. And it just is interesting. There's a ripple effect with every part of your life, including relationships, sex, you know. children. Yeah. So it's fascinating.
It's amazing what you do when you connect to your core and to your source. Like, it's really amazing. You just go back to your source and really heal from there. And I think so many women, when they start doing the work and they go on their soul journey, they realize how much stuff in the background was running without them being even aware, how many subconscious programming we have that we're not aware of, how much trauma is held in the body that we don't even think is trauma. I think a lot of women, don't want to go to the word trauma because it seems like a victim, and we are strong and we can deal with anything. But in reality, there's a lot of mini traumas that we deal with, but have set a very strong tone in our body and how we interact, how we connect, how we react. And so by clearing those and really, like you said, connecting with your body, it's amazing. It's amazing what can happen. So I'm curious if any of our listeners want to find you and get to know more about you and what you do. Where can they find you?
Yeah, well, I have social media, of course, Instagram and Facebook. So Michelle K. And then I also, if they want to actually reach me directly, I have a website. It's, well, my email is hello@michelle-k.com. And my website is just michelle-k.com. So yeah, I'm happy to, hop on a call and talk to anyone about it. And I just am obsessed with helping women get better lives, better bodies, better homes, better marriages, all the things that are so important to helping us function well. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your contribution. This conversation was really enlightenment, and I think would really benefit a lot of our listeners. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate you. Thank you for listening, and we'll tune in again next week. Bye.
Thank you for having me.